Hi, everyone. Welcome to our broadcast this morning. My name is Kate Sample. I'm with PESI Publishing, and I am thrilled to be here today with Dr. Rheeda Walker. We are here to celebrate the release of her new book. No, I don't want the glare there. No racial elephants in the therapy room. An unapologetic approach to providing culturally affirming mental health care to Black and African American clients. Dr. Walker, thank you so much for being here. We are so thrilled. We're so excited to celebrate this release today. This is such a good book and is so needed. Thank you so much for being here to help us celebrate.
Absolutely. I'm in a celebratory mood, so I'm excited about this conversation with you, Kate.
Yes, likewise. Let's just jump right in. Tell our audience a little bit about why you wrote this book, what the process was like. Kind of let us dive into your mind a little bit about why this book was so needed.
Yes, well, I think first and foremost, give accolades and acknowledgement to Dr. Janessa Jackson, who has been the editor through this process, and
Yes.
her excitement and affirmation about the book, recognizing that when all mental health professionals go into our discipline, the goal is to help people, right? We hear it so often, like I want to help people, and the expectation is that we're helping all people. But the reality is that there are segments of our society, and namely African American and Black individuals, who are left behind, including in the therapy space.
Yes.
And as part of my background, for those who may not be familiar, I've been a university professor for the past 20 years, primarily engaged in both research and in training the next generation of clinical psychologists. And in that work and in a lot of the work that I do, I see folks and I hear folks who say, well, but how do I say that? Like, how do I talk to clients about things like race and racism? And I've had supervisees to avoid the topic, to the point where I say, if you don't go back in there and talk about that client's race, it's going to be me and you. And so I get that there, and I've seen these fears, but the fears aren't helpful for our clients
Right.
who need to be able to trust their therapist. And when I say the therapist, I'm saying the therapist who does not look like them, who
Right.
does not have
Right.
that inherent sort of connection to the African American community and the struggles and the challenges that are unfortunately built into so many aspects of our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you about Dr. Janessa Jackson. She's amazing. She's a wonderful colleague, and she has absolutely spearheaded this project alongside of you internally, just cheering it on and giving it her all. So, yes, kudos to her absolutely for speaking with you, getting you to write with us, and thank you to you for writing with us. We're absolutely honored and thrilled to have published this book. Because as you know, mental health clinicians, that's who we serve. That's who we work for, and we want to make sure that we're giving the latest and greatest resources possible. And the problem that's out there that you just described so eloquently is very real across the country, across the world. I would even venture to say, um, when we look at training for clinicians, I think what sets apart your approach in this book is that it is unapologetic, yet it's conversational and very accessible. So you speak about things that's all very empirically based, but also based in being a human, right? And knowing that clinicians are sitting in the room across from another clinician, and they don't look like they are the same person. And so having that conversation and being so open in your book, I think just makes it immensely helpful for any clinician. Um, where do we feel like, because I think this is a growing issue, it's way behind the times, but growing in awareness, which is a good thing. I think there's a good movement. However, where does cultural competency, cultural responsiveness, cultural humility, there's a lot of different terms that are used, where does that fall short when it comes to like coursework, training, that kind of thing, for graduates of their master's program or doctoral program?
Well, these courses obviously are important to have, but
Mhm.
they're kind of a starting point.
Mhm.
And in that coursework and in training and even in our continuing education, I feel like we get this sense that there's like a checkpoint. Like, okay, I checked
Yeah.
off that box of cultural competency. And to be sure, I think most folks would assume that they've met some, requirement maybe for licensure or for their
Mhm.
degree, but they still don't have a sense of confidence of how to use the information. And then also, those courses kind of obscure a lot of the complexities of what it means in our society to be a Black or African American person. And to be
Mhm.
sure, when we talk about Black folks, we're not saying this applies to all Black people.
Of
But for a
course.
lot of Black people, the issues are complex and complicated. Trying to figure out how to show up on a job and be one's authentic self, but then to be penalized and maligned for being authentic and
Mhm.
then having to develop a certain level of hypervigilance around, well, is it me? What am I doing wrong? Is it them? And that fuels anxiety. And then there are issues sometimes with children and trying to figure out the school systems. Like there are just so many different ways in
Yes.
which injustice can show up in the lives of people who just want to live, just like anyone else. And
Yeah.
so when we have these sort of check boxes, it's like, okay, I've done cultural competency for
Mhm.
this year, then that doesn't allow us to be able to pivot in order to integrate the reality of the person sitting in front of us
Right.
and how to be able to help them to deal with, their thoughts that may be challenging, how to help them to integrate the resources and the sense of resilience that they have, because you have to have a certain amount of resilience in this society as an African American person, how to integrate that into the therapy. And so a
Right.
lot gets missed, unfortunately, when we have these, single courses. In some training programs, there are more, two courses. But I don't know about you. When I was in grad school, we had one course.
One.
And then we had an elective, that you didn't have to take. And so there's so much, so many ways in which those courseworks and what we have in our systems that they fail, that the book needed to be written in the way that I wrote it.
Yes, absolutely. No, I when I look back on my training in graduate school almost 20 years ago now, I had one course, and I can think of my CE seminars and things that I took over the years. I don't think I ever had a requirement in any of the states that I lived in, but I can think of maybe one, maybe two CE seminars that I attended. And it did very much feel like I was checking off a box. Like, yep, okay, I learned all the basics about these different cultures that are different than mine. Okay, now I'm going to go back to practicing. It wasn't like I didn't feel like I was integrating it. I didn't feel like I had anything that I could sit down in front of a client and say, not even say, but just integrate what I learned. It was just more high level generalities about different cultures, including my own, and that's it. And
Right.
that was just sort of it. And I think your book really bridges that gap for so many clinicians, because it is, like I said, it's accessible, it's easy to read, it's easy to relate to, and it talks about how uncomfortable it can be for a white clinician to broach the topic with a black client, right? And you say it so straightforwardly that it's like, yes, thank you, because I want to know how to say these things. I want to know how to repair if I've done something inadvertently, to cause harm. I want to know these things. And I think it's so interesting that your book is based in CBT. And I think it's interesting because I don't know if you've seen on like within the therapy influencer culture, anything about CBT being more about like gaslighting yourself. Have you seen this at all? Yeah.
I haven't,
So
I haven't honestly, but I'm not surprised.
yes. Okay. Well, there you go. So it was just interesting. I'm like, and now here we are. I'm gonna talk with, Dr. Walker about CBT when it comes to race and race related issues. Tell me about how CBT works within the context of what you've written, and how it doesn't work. That might be too broad of a question, or maybe too big for our purposes today. But what do you think about that?
We'll see where we get with it, and you
Sure,
can let
sure.
me know. But well, first and foremost, I appreciate this question because for any clinician or clinician in training who is watching, like communicating to a client that anything about race or racism is somehow in their head,
Yes.
is a microaggression. And while it may seem, nice and as a way of helping,
Mhm.
because there has to be a certain level of trust between the client and the therapist, like suggesting that someone's day-to-day reality in any way can will undermine, the therapeutic alliance, which is the single most important thing for success in therapy. At the same time, CBT is about changing thoughts,
Mhm.
right? Or at
Mhm.
least that's what that interventions course said. It's about extracting those errors, those cognitive errors and those distortions, which means you're doing something wrong.
Right.
And what I do, especially, with my clinicians in training and throughout this book, is to talk about unhelpful ways of thinking. And so that's not to say that, well, you can't be upset about an experience because we have to affirm our clients' experiences. We have to affirm our clients' experiences so that they know that the therapist, regardless of who they are, hears them. And so first you hear and affirm, and then we have to be able to talk about, okay, I understand that this circumstance was really upsetting for you. I can tell. I can see it. And by the way, I include these dialogues in as an examples,
Yes.
in the text. Tell me more about that because the therapist has to fully understand the client's experience. And then being able to say, it seems to me that this experience was disempowering for you in a lot of ways. And clients,
Mhm.
folks don't think about what racism does, but it is maligning, it is disempowering, and it takes away that person's capacity to be able to problem solve and to be effective.
Yeah.
And so if we want to be helpful, we can talk to the client about what that circumstance did to them and how they can take back their power in those circumstances rather than necessarily hitting a wall with that person was wrong and they mistreated me, or maybe I don't know, and they're ruminating in their mind about what
Mhm.
happened, which we
Mhm.
also know is problematic. And so we have to be able to hear and affirm and empower our clients with CBT, and those are the examples that I use in this new book.
Yes, very well said. I think the takeaway, as you said, is to affirm their experience, um, without, and tell me if this is right, without allowing it to run the show, right? And without allowing it to become, um, in the way of their progress, in the way of their healing, in the way of their everyday wellness. So it's not necessarily about whether or not their experience is true. It is, but it's more about meeting them there and saying, what can we do with this? Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yes. And so
Yeah.
we're, and avoiding the errors because we spend a lot of time, talking about cognitive distortions and
Mhm.
understandably so, that's kind of foundational to CBT. But
Yes.
then how can we facilitate the client navigating that? Now, to be
Mhm.
sure, if a client is in a workspace where they are continually, mistreated and maligned, that's not a space that they want to be in long term. And so then the therapist may be working with the client to problem solve how to get out of these non-affirming spaces. That
Right.
could be a path. But the other path is recognizing or helping the client to not internalize, because I didn't say this part, to not internalize whatever
Yes.
racist thing happened, because that is also another problem of racism, that folks start to question their own competency, their own
Yes.
brilliance,
Of course.
so to speak, and that undermines their capacity to be able to do their job that they're being paid to do.
Right. Right. What do you think? And there's probably a million answers to this question, but what do you think drives um, that fear among, I'm just going to say, white clinicians across the board? And again, this obviously doesn't, apply to everyone, but clearly there's an avoidance, there's a fear, there's a discomfort with talking about race, with talking about racial trauma and things like that. In your experience, in who you've supervised and research and all of the work that you've done, what do you think really drives that avoidance, or that hesitance, even is a better word, maybe, or that cautiousness? I don't know what the right word is.
Well, fear works for me, as a CBT therapist because of the anxiety and the worry and the individual's belief that they can't manage whatever situation or circumstance evolved from them having a misstep, saying the wrong thing. And, for high achieving folks, we assume that we've got this.
Yeah.
We can manage this.
Yeah.
But the reality is that psychotherapy is a microcosm of our larger society. where we don't talk so much about race, or we argue about race and what it means. And there are sets of people who aren't able to hear one another. And then we also subscribe to this colorblind society that is problematic in so many ways. I'm pretty sure then that when Reverend Dr. King said that he didn't want his children to be judged by the color of their skin and instead by the content of their character, he didn't say, let's not see race. What
Right.
he really wanted
Right.
was for people to be seen as humans, to be seen by their character.
Yes.
But instead, we've adopted this colorblind society where we say, well,
Yes.
I don't see you as black. But the reality is that I'm an African American woman. And so if you don't see me as black, then I'm questioning either your eyesight or your judgment or something about you. And then we
Right.
can't do therapy. And
Yeah.
so, I think that there is this sort of collusion around we're just not going to see race because it seems polite or nice. And oh my goodness, if I do and I say something wrong, then I'm not going to be able to recover from it.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a problem with our training programs that we don't teach therapists how to recover and genuinely so. But once we, I think, develop more community around these topics, with clinicians supporting one another, clinicians seeking consultation. I talk
Yeah.
about this in the book, that there's some studies that suggest that folks aren't really seeking consultation.
Yeah.
That we're able to do the work that needs to be done for some of our most vulnerable clients who have oftentimes been told, well, you took that the wrong way, or you're just being too sensitive, and
Right.
are left to navigate that on their own.
Right, absolutely. I think you bring up a really strong point about the consultation. I just immediately jumped to private practice, which can be such an isolating experience. You can feel very lonely in private practice without that, even just on a social level, but then also the clinical consultation, you can get very much siloed. And so take a great takeaway, I think, from today is to seek that consultation, to find someone that you can speak openly about all of these issues with, or if something is coming up in the therapy room. It's just so valuable to have that. Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being here, and for publishing your book with us. We are thrilled to have it. We are thrilled that it's out today, finally, at last. It's got a beautiful cover. Highly, highly recommend it. It's so conversational, so accessible, clinically sound. It is just exactly what a clinician needs if they're struggling with this issue. And honestly, just to look at the mental health system in general. And I mean, your first chapter is named Much to Overcome. And I think that it is just a beautiful opening to talk about. You beautifully lay out what the problem is within the field. And then you get right into how I, as a clinician, can make a difference in my therapy room with my clients. And it's wonderful. Thank you so much for writing it and for
Thank
trusting
you.
us with your work. We appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful process, and I certainly enjoyed every step of it and working with the staff at PESI. Just thank you all so very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for tuning in. I actually didn't even look to see if we have questions. We do not have any questions, but feel free to share this video. It will be available on all of our channels across PESI, and we'll be sharing it with Dr. Walker as well. So thank you for joining us for this conversation. Everyone have